Welcome back to the channel, you guys. In today's video, we are going to dig into some numbers, and it is going to all be in regards to valuation, which is something that I think is super important that realtors do not talk enough about. And I think it's crucial for both buyers and sellers to understand value. And of course, value is subjective, which makes it even dicier. But I want to talk to you guys today about my very pragmatic approach to valuation. Moving to Southern Missouri is the best thing I've ever done for my family. And what I like about this subject is that this information is really helpful for both buyers and sellers. And it doesn't mean that you can't hold to your gun of like how you believe something should be valued, but at least I want to have everyone at least soften their perspective where they can understand the other side. And I do want to toot my own horn. Toot toot. Because I do feel that one of my strengths is really being a little bit more detailed in my valuation and how I break down properties, especially properties that are dynamic. And here's what I mean by that. I have found it rare in the real estate world, except actually when I'm working with really seasoned investors. Here's what I love about investors though, is they actually have a complete understanding of like the valuation tips that I'm about to tell you. And then they're like, let's just see if they'll take 100,000 less. Because seasoned investors are not emotional. They'll accept 20 no's in a day. They're only mining for deals. So it's just a different experience. But I actually often really connect with them on valuation. They agree, and then they're like, but let's just see if we can just lowball them. And I can appreciate that because it's very straightforward. It's not manipulative at all for a lot of investors that I work with. But I want to talk about those dynamic properties that we really have to break apart to come to a place of valuation. So, for example, if you have a property that has both a home, structures, and acreage. So in terms of acreage, I like to break it apart. I'm going to be honest, sometimes I will break it apart into 3 different prices per acreage. Usually I'm kind of just doing an average of 2 prices per acreage. And that's because very rarely is all land the same, right? Especially here in the Ozarks, there's different types of land. There's flat pasture that's cattle ready, and there's steep, rugged, forested hillside. And those fetch a different price. Now, I can appreciate when I see realtors find an average between those prices. So, we will talk to each other. The handful of realtors that I have a meeting of the minds with, and we talk about an average of those numbers. So they're kind of taking that high price that they're maybe attributing for the flat pasture, and then they're also averaging it with that lower price that's for the wooded hillside. I think that that's totally agreeable, and they're at least acknowledging both, right? Where I have a problem, and this goes for you sellers, but often I feel like it does come with encouragement from a lot of realtors, which is taking that very high price of the perfect dream flat pasture, which, is harder to find here in the Ozarks, and then attributing it to the entire parcel. When part of the parcel is steep wooded, not super usable, other than maybe hunting and target practice, right? Or goats or pigs, but for the most part, not super usable, not the same as the flat pasture. And you are trying to give that high value for the entire parcel. It does bother me. I don't think that is a realistic valuation. And what I find too is that when I talk to a lot of realtors, they're just not maybe as seasoned as thinking of things this way and breaking things down in their mind. And maybe too, because I find this a little bit more with urban realtors, is that they're not used to how would one use a piece of property, right? What are all the different uses? And then having valuation that kind of represents the value, because even if you looked at animals, your flat pasture that is perfect for cattle, which is kind of your top dollar, animal that you can have on your farm in terms of profit. And then you can rotate that easily with sheep and chickens. You could, if one wanted to. Just the amount of money that you could make from that flat pasture is a lot more money than you could make from a steep wooded hillside where like, you know, logging is more arduous. You know, maybe you're looking at like some goats and some hunting, and just like the amount of money, dollar amount that you can pull from that is not the same as the flat pasture. And so I do think that oftentimes maybe urban realtors are not thinking of that land use and like actual value. So rule number one for my valuation is I like to break the acreage apart into different valuations in terms of the topography and the usefulness of the land. Another thing I do like to give credit to, although sometimes I think that realtors overprice this too, which is amazing water features. Now, we have them in the Ozarks for sure. You can find properties with wet weather creeks, spring-fed creeks, river access, amazing ponds, spring-fed stocked ponds. I mean, just so much waterfalls, spring-fed waterfalls. I've seen it all, other than ocean. You're not gonna find ocean, but other than that, I mean, you can find every amazing water feature that one would want. A moment ago, I had kind of strong words, a little bit of a chide to talk to sellers and listing agents, right? Where I was kind of like, you can't like value all that acreage as if it's primo pasture when half of it's wooded steep hillside, right? That's kind of a dig. I'm kind of putting them in their place, right? Buyers, it's your turn, okay? I've got so many buyers. In fact, I would say, 90%. I'm just gonna throw out a random number, but I'm gonna guess 90%. The highest majority of my buyers want some sort of epic water feature, but very few recognize that they have to pay for that. And it doesn't mean all the time. Sometimes you buy a rugged piece of property and like no one has even properly walked the property, and you're gonna find an amazing spring-fed pond in the middle of nowhere on that steep wooded hillside, tucked up in the hillside that's like amazing, huge productive spring that like no one even knew about, right? Like you can find that, but generally speaking, if the water features are known, they are usually added into the value of the land. And I cannot speak against that. I think that that is fair. And buyers, here's my frustration with you is so many of you want 1, 2, 3, 4 epic water features, but you want the absolute lowest price. And I just don't think that that's reasonable. I think that if you want epic water features, you need to recognize that most sellers and most realtors are going to represent that value in the price. There was actually a property that I was drooling over last night, and you know, just like you guys, still as a realtor, I'm scrolling, looking at property and just like fantasizing, right? I mean, we all do it. And that's actually something that made me want to be a realtor. Is like, I just love looking at property, but I always have the ones that I have like my secret, like, you know, fantasies for, and just can see that they're beautiful, right? But there is one, and it is a 60-acre piece, and it is so overpriced, I think, but it has a huge creek in it. I think it even has a little bit of riverfront. So beautiful. It's got some spring-fed ponds. It's got a wet weather creek. It's got absolutely gorgeous pasture, but they are priced at like almost $8,000 an acre for all these water features. They're about $80,000 over what I think is even reasonable to ask for the water features. There's got to be kind of a middle ground. And of course that property is sat. It has not sold. It is epic. It has not sold because it's not amazing. It has not sold because they're asking almost $200,000 over prime pasture price. And it's not all pasture. It's about a third, maybe a little bit more than a third is primo pasture. It's got a lot of great forest. It does have marketable timber, so that does fetch a higher price. We're not talking about logged forest or steep hillsided forest, pretty flat marketable timber, so that has value. I mean, come on now. I honestly think it's still about 100,000 over, but what's great is it's gonna sit on the market so I can like look at it and fawn and think, you know, maybe someday they'll come down. But we've all got to kind of find that reasonable place. That's what I talk a lot about compromise. I want both sides to see where the other one is coming from. Is like, yeah, buyer, you need to actually attribute some value to all these epic water features that in a lot of the country you cannot find. We are special here. Springs, caves, waterfalls. I mean, we've got things that a lot of states don't have, period. I think it's reasonable to put value in it, right? I come from a place of water scarcity. Water abundance is valuable. Some people would say it's priceless. There should be value there. But on the flip side, I don't think that we can just like keep throwing 100,000s, tack on another 100,000 to the price because it has some amazing features, water or pasture or whatever, and think that that's reasonable too. So we need to find a middle ground. And when we don't, we will see properties not sell. For sure. So now we're going to talk about different valuation of homes, structures, and other amenities. And this gets dicey, also subjective, and also not always easy because you have aging structures and aging systems and all of these things that are hard for anyone, even appraisers. Trust me, appraisers have a nail-biting job for sure. It's challenging, but I think that it's paying attention to details and then just trying to get as wide of a kind of comparative analysis as you can, because valuation is constantly changing. I mean, right? It gets complicated. So with that thinking, we're going to talk about, before we move into the home, we're going to talk about outbuildings, systems, roads, etc. For the most part, no one is attributing value to roads. Not even a really nice road, especially if it's gravel. Now, I have seen value attributed to brand new asphalt because, oh my gosh, that can be expensive. Like you can drop 50 to 100,000 in asphalt now, you guys, like no problem. There would definitely be like value attributed to like some sort of like cool, like cobblestone driveway or like something that's like very obviously expensive and obviously a value add. I would say still not the best way. Like if you were a flipper, not the best way to get value though, necessarily. I mean, appraisers aren't probably going to give you even close to what you spend on those projects in value. So like, that's why you don't see tons of flippers like put new asphalt down. You just don't, right? Because the value is not there. It does not correlate to the asking price. So this is one thing I want to talk about. So I've talked about this in other videos, but it's really important to understand with value, especially those of you that are thinking like, is it better to build or buy? Right now with where we're at in the cycle, almost all the time, not all the time, but most frequently, you get more bang for your buck if you buy something pre-existing that has, working, functioning systems versus completely raw land. And these little details are why, because you are not going to, like the seller is not going to be putting into that value maybe the $5,000 that they've spent to upgrade the dirt roads. Maybe there's been grading and rock and a culvert put in and this, that, and the other. I mean, for the most part, that's kind of like, yeah, you got to have access and it just is in that whole price. So for the most part, that is like money lost. So when you're looking at buying raw land, a lot of people aren't thinking about the $20,000 that they're going to spend on their well. Like for sure, like if you're spending $15,000, a buddy that's giving you a deal, or you just got a smoking deal, or it's a very shallow well and you just lucked out because $20,000 is your average price now. So $20,000 there. Really, I want to say 8 to 10 for your septic now, depending on your lateral lines and your leach field and how you do it, of course, right? The size of the tank. If you are going to have a lagoon hybrid system, all that stuff matters, but I tell people to budget at least $8,000 for a septic, where not just a handful of years ago, I said $5,000. Not that you can't find a redneck or a neighbor to still do it for $5,000, but it's getting harder, okay? So you've got $20,000 for your well, $8,000 to $10,000 for your septic. And then I tell people really $2,000 to $5,000 for your roads, but easily you can spend $10,000. Oh my gosh, I've spent $10,000 on roads so many times and it's not that hard to do. I've never done it, but back in the day, people used to even have like a steamroller thing and steamroll their gravel roads. Like that was like the really wealthy people out in the country would do that. But there's so many different things that you can do for your roads, and so many heavy equipment operators. I'm going to be honest, it's harder to find really good ones around here that know how to build roads really, really well. I see a lot of bad heavy equipment work where like just like they're not really designing the water flow and everything. I've also talked about like them not putting in enough switchbacks, so roads blowing out. I see a lot of shoddy work, so really be careful with that when you are designing your road, and like make sure that you as a developer are really noodling it and not just putting it all on your heavy equipment operator, because they might not be totally trustworthy. Like you might need to have some input there. Those are all these costs, right, that are not really added into value. People don't add those in to the value. Here's the truth. A lot of people are just looking at acreage holistically, and they're looking at the square footage price holistically, like very general average prices, and they're not breaking things down. But so often those things are not included in that square footage price or the acreage price. So buyers, this is when you have to realize there's a lot of hidden costs to development. And then you have to look at like prepping your home site. I mean, that can be thousands of dollars too. Sometimes when builders will give you a square foot price, they're not factoring in the concrete foundation work. I mean, there's so many things. So you really have to dig deep into those numbers. But so much of the infrastructure that it takes to have a home is not added in value. But I will stick to what I've said in other videos. If you have the money and if you have the skill set, like if you and your family members know how to build, like you will make it work. That is where the money can be saved. Man, those are the families who are really like just crushing it, is when they all have amazing skill sets and they work together and do each other's projects. They're just blowing everybody out of the water because they're able to save so much money with their development. So if you have skill set, building makes sense. If you just have a good chunk of money to work with, building makes sense. If you are counting your pennies and like money really matters, building right now does not make sense. I would find something that you can remodel that has working systems or systems that need just light repair versus full installation on raw land. And we also didn't talk about bringing power over. And if you want alternative energy, that's expensive too. Okay, so that is where I believe building is really makes sense right now, just for a select few. Now we're going to talk outbuildings. Outbuildings are tricky for valuation because they are aging buildings, right? I mean, so that is what I would say is that, so first of all, with a shop, oh my gosh. And this is where I need to also say, you guys, I treat every building, every property like a snowflake. They're all so unique. So I was looking at a shop with some buyers the other day, and I was like, oh man, like it would take like 150 to rebuild this. And they were like, what? They're like, you're crazy. We just talked to a builder and he was like 40K for a shop. But what we were looking at was red steel construction with like reinforced concrete walls and all concrete floor, and like really nice lighting and electrical and stuff and outlets everywhere. And I think that people just don't realize that, like, when builders say $30,000 to $50,000 for a shop, like it might not even have a concrete floor. It probably doesn't have electricity. It probably doesn't have insulation. We're talking about very cheap 2x4 stick built, definitely metal, which is awesome. Still a great structure, but I have a hard time because people will hear that number and they'll even just look at a shop and like think it's the same as that like really nice red steel built, like it's so much more than a shop kind of structure. Like they can be built so strong and just so much energy and money goes into them, and the materials can be so expensive. So, I mean, I'm not kidding you. I saw a shop recently and I was like, whoa, this is incredible. I was kind of feeling like, did this cost $200,000 to build? And they had put $250,000, $250,000 into the shop alone. This is where you save money buying, is that in valuation, you are not going to see them get their $250,000, even though that was this was actually a brand new shop and they were flipping. They weren't trying to flip, they had to move, but they were selling the property quickly. I mean, not even close. Like, I think the way we broke it down was the shop was getting like 100,000. So they were losing 150,000 on that shop. So the reason why I bring this up is because to reiterate that valuation is tricky. It comes down to the individual building. When you see something that is incredibly well built, please, buyers, recognize that that was probably took so much more money than they're going to get back from their sale price, especially with where we're at with the cost of materials. And sellers, you need to understand this if you want your property to sell. With where we're at, where we're kind of at a normalized market, that's a term I've used, but that we're kind of like a normal market, you're like, is it a buyer's market? Is it a seller's market? Like everyone's kind of having to compromise, like what's going on, right? That is a normal market. So in a normal market, you are not going to get massive value from your outbuildings. Often I see people selling and they're not getting the value of all their fencing. You still will see in like raw acreage price, like if you've got cattle pens and like full cattle workup, if you got all that infrastructure, then you're gonna see that reflected somewhat in the price, but definitely not at replacement costs. So homes, that square footage price, that is where the money is really like valued. That is where you can make your money. And that's why you're not seeing like tons of like new construction, like where they're building the shop. You know what I mean? Heck, it's even hard to find a detached garage sometimes with new construction. But yeah, that value, the bulk of that value is in your square footage. That's why actually a great strategy, buyers, buy a big home with, good bones that has large square footage. And if you love that up, you've got serious equity. You don't have as much equity if you get something like small old farmhouse with tons of outbuildings. That in terms of like equity is not the same. But if you need to use those outbuildings, then it has value and that property is the one you still should get, right? Because it does need to come down to value. But I want personal value. I wanted to describe that because I feel like I see a lot of sellers right now trying to itemize like everything on their property and tacking that onto the price. And I first of all don't think that that has ever really been that way with real estate. I think it's always been more the value is the square footage of the home and the acreage. And then a little bit of value is attributed to outbuildings. Of course, shops fetch a price, they fetch value, but not the full story, not the full value. So I'm gonna wrap this video up talking about homes. We have talked about it in a lot of videos. It really should be broken down into so many different categories, right? Because I've talked about you have new construction, you've got freshly remodeled, and then you have in need of remodel. And then within those three categories, you have so many subsects, right? You have high-end, mid-end, and low-grade finishes in each one of those. So what is that? That's like technically 9 categories, but I mean, you could niche it out even more than that. So I do have a frustration when a lot of realtors just come up with these like they look at average price per square footage and they attribute it to properties without it reflecting the actual property. So I think that that is not a good way to value homes and square footage. I like to treat every property as a snowflake, and then I also like to look at the specific location, because as we say this, like obviously acreage and square footage is gonna be, let's say, Christian County. It's gonna be a lot higher in Christian County than it is if you go out east to Oregon County. For the most part, I mean, we're talking big number differences, right? So those location obviously needs to be assessed. But then the other thing too is that, I mean, really several times a year, those numbers need to be reassessed because we have fluctuations in value even within a year, even a normal year. And I think it does reflect demand. So like you see prices hold out in desirable markets where things are really flowing. You see price tick up a little bit in the spring because there's so much competition, right? You see sellers soften a little bit in the winter, which is interesting because I feel like more buyers, you need to figure this out and like shop in the winter. But I do get that a lot of people shop in the spring because it's when their schedule allows, they have a spring break or whatever. And then also because they want to have that, they want to shop when there's that more inventory. So I understand that strategy as well. When it comes to valuation of square footage, way more than acreage. It fluctuates and it's really location dependent. And then of course, product dependent. Is it new construction? Is it remodeled, etc.? So I would like to break down that property individually in terms of when we're looking at it, where we're looking at it, yada, yada. I think that a lot of people aren't digging into the numbers that like specifically drilling down. And I think it's really important to come to a more realistic value. Right now too, in real estate, we have so many older generation that are passing on, hopefully to heaven. And we've got a lot of people who are inheriting land, and a lot of them don't live here. They don't really know what they have. They don't care. They just want a quick turnaround. And so, I mean, we're seeing that a lot too in analytics, where like properties are being sold for super cheap. If there is like that rush to sell it. Usually though, in those situations, you have a realtor that maybe is buffering that a little bit and going, hey, you guys, you could get a lot more money for this. And generally people will listen to a realtor and want to fetch the highest price. But I've seen a lot of people that inherit land and want to get rid of it ASAP, sell it as is as quickly as possible. And they have almost foreclosure prices. I have been noticing that. So one thing that we do have right now in our real estate cycle is a huge aging generation that is passing on. That is also affecting value and analytics. But I would say like seller motivation is that big thing that just kind of wipes out any of the analytics I was talking about. And it goes either way. If you have sellers that don't need to sell, that in their mind, what they have is priceless and they're just going to hold on to that price, then, what I have to say doesn't matter anyway, because they're going to hold on to their price. And then also if you have people that are highly motivated that are going to sell at rock bottom foreclosure level prices because they just don't even know, they don't care, they want it done quick. So you always will find that in a real estate market. And those values, hey, those comps are still pulled by assessors all the same. And that's why people get so mad, right? In neighborhoods where you might have like a probate situation where someone in the trust came together and they sold it so cheap. The neighbors aren't going to be happy about that because it brings down their value. But knowing that there's always those outliers and those have to be, at least considered in all of this different talk on valuation and assessment. I hope that wasn't boring. I'm sorry if I rambled too much. There's so much to talk about with valuation. It's an area that I feel a little nerdcore, like I love it. If you don't love it and you're still here, I'm sorry. But if you're still here, you probably love it a little bit too. And I hope that you guys can see that I'm trying to talk to both buyers and sellers. Sometimes I say encouraging things or discouraging things to either side, because I do think that we need to kind of meet in the middle, understand all of these like very niche, nuanced points, and start to maybe speak to each other in these languages where we can kind of have a meeting of the minds. So I want to thank you if you stuck around. You're, I think, probably either a little nerdcore like I am, or you're just super bored and watching something that you hate. So either way, thank you. And call me if you have any real estate needs. As always, my info is in the description, and I'm here for you if you need me. And if you think that maybe Southern Missouri is for you, I hope to help you in your journey. Okay, you guys, until next time, bye.